now we have a really interesting person, is Dr. Michael Mosimann. Michael Mosimann is a partner with Prager Dreifuss Ltd. He practices in the area of M&A, contract law, as well as commercial and corporate law, and is the head of Prager Dreifuss Ltd's venture team.
Everything was a little bit Wild West, I'd say. There were many people who wanted to do ICOs and then actually collected huge amounts of money in connection with those ICOs without paying attention to regulation at all. And when we as lawyers spoke about regulation being potentially applicable to their business case, nobody wanted to hear that. I think in the meantime, regulators have come forward and emphasizing that existing regulations could actually apply to the blockchain business models as well. But still, there was a little bit of doubt in the ecosystem whether that's really true. But in the meantime, the space has become aware of that. Also, I think all the financial players in the game realized that. As I said, we still have many financial players who realize that there is financial regulation to be paid attention to. But we also have still plenty of blockchain tech enthusiasts in the space who are to some extent still a little bit reluctant to accept that we have regulation in here.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Yeah, the next question is, what do you mean with the space currently being dominated by financial players?
I'd say it's not banks or investment funds and not yet central banks, but it's rather by generally people with some sort of financial background. If you look at Cointelegraph, for example, there you see reports about Bitcoin price rallies and Bitcoin price decreases, which look much more like some sort of market prediction. Where does the market develop? It seems like Bitcoin price is reported as market index for the entire cryptocurrency space. And also reference is made to Bitcoin price being bearish or...
Wow. Now, it's disconnected. I don't know what's happened there. I hope we will... oh, he's back. Okay.
Yeah, with a rather financial background, talking about these things rather than really tech guys. And also, if you look at players in the space offering business models or issuing tokens, most of those tokens have either a connection to financial market things like being tokenized shares, being derivatives, being money at all. And then we also have people offering business models that have potential market connection, such as investment opportunities. If you think of all these business models who want to make real estate investments easier or more liquidated so that essentially people can invest in real estate or also art, for example, where people tend or intend to tokenize either real estate or a piece of artwork in order to allow everybody to participate with a small fraction therein. Then we go into the direction of investment opportunities and investment funds. So it's not that tricky at all. But so far, we have also seen the interest nowadays of central banks now thinking of issuing cryptocurrencies themselves, which would essentially be central bank cryptocurrencies. Think of the Swiss National Bank suddenly issuing a cryptocurrency called the digital Swiss franc. And so we nowadays see many bigger players entering the market here.
Okay, it's very interesting what's happened there in the future. We have to look there in this special corner, I say the corner. Okay, how has the regulation in the space evolved?
It actually has not really evolved that much. I think in the very beginning, regulators made it clear that the existing regulation that we have on financial market infrastructure, financial instruments, money, and the like, simply applies to blockchain-based business models and tokens in the same manner, thereby essentially treating market participants equal. Essentially making the argument, regardless of what technology you use, if you offer a certain business model and that business model is regulated, you are also subject to those regulations if you build your business model on a blockchain. But that doesn't really change much. We have seen some countries, to some extent, overreacting on and implementing some sort of regulation. So I usually like to make the example here of Malta. Essentially, a couple of years ago, suddenly Malta came forward with blockchain and cryptocurrency regulation, and Malta was hyped as the place to be because they now have ICO regulation, they now have cryptocurrency regulation. And everybody wanted to go to Malta. And I once had the pleasure to speak to Malta lawyers. And of course, I asked them, being a member of the European Union and knowing that there are European regulations on financial instruments and money and the like, to what extent have they actually regulated ICOs? And the answer was kind of astonishing. They openly admitted, well, all that EU regulation still prevails. Essentially, what they have regulated is just a tiny fraction of ICOs and token business models that fall through all the scopes of the European regulations. So, having seen a couple ICOs and tokens nowadays, it's probably a fraction of less than 5% what they have actually regulated. So implementing a huge regulation with essentially little benefit because they only regulated a small fraction of the entire market. But what regulators and also legislators around the globe have actually realized is that traditional laws such as contract laws, corporate laws, also financial market infrastructure laws have realized that certain amendments are required. And yeah, that's what is going on now.
Okay. Perhaps I will go there later more in when we are in a panel on the evening or in the afternoon. So
sure.
I think there is a lot of questions out there which we can clarify more, that we will see what's happened there in the future. So just to be clear, the blockchain technology itself is not regulated, correct? What would be an example of an unregulated blockchain-based business model?
Absolutely true. The blockchain technology itself is not regulated. So we haven't seen any laws around the globe yet saying blockchain technology is bad, we need to ban it. It's like a weapon. A weapon itself does not harm. It's usually the person pulling the trigger who harms other people by using the weapon. However, what is heavily regulated are certain business models and open token sales, depending on what functionalities and rights these tokens reflect. Thereby, again, saying if you want to play in such a financial market, then you obviously need to comply with the same regulations as traditional players, regardless of what technology you use. You have asked about examples for potential business models, blockchain-based, that are not regulated at all. Very simple ones would essentially be where the blockchain technology is used in order to keep track of records or transactions. So besides the entire money and payment services, we could also think of blockchain-based registries, such as, for example, private registries, such as share ledgers in a company, or then rather public registries, especially thinking of the register of commerce here in Switzerland, or more general, the company register everywhere in the world. Also land registers. These could essentially just use blockchain technology to operate their registries on. Another scope of application for rather unregulated business models I really see in the entire supply chain and logistics service industry. So, for example, keeping track of products' origin and checking the entire supply chain step by step is probably pretty easy done by way of blockchain technology. Another scope is essentially keeping track of logistics, for example. I once heard an example of a guy being hired by the Port Authority of Rotterdam, developing a blockchain-based system which allows the Port of Rotterdam to keep track of every single container going through the port, which would then essentially enable every participant in that network, all the workers at the port authorities, custom authorities, and whatsoever, to have real-time track of the containers, where they are located. So there are indeed business models. We also see in the decentralized finance space a couple of business models that could indeed be unregulated, and very interesting aspects here, because we still have a couple or many million people around the world who are unbanked, who have no access to the financial system nowadays. But many of them have still a smartphone, nevertheless. So if you bring cryptocurrencies and digital payment solutions to them, I think there is a huge potential to go there, even without being required to pay too much attention to regulations.
Okay. Yeah, we will see what's happened there, because you see that in China at the moment with the digitalization money, what's come up there. And we see that not all the companies like McDonald's and Starbucks want to have that money on her jobs, or in her, yeah, we say that in the shops. So they don't accept that in China, I think, and it would be a special kind of trouble in the future. And we will see what's happened there and how the Chinese say, okay, it's good for us or it's not good for us. We will see that.
I mean, they obviously have additional questions, especially in China with capital export restrictions. They have. It's not primarily motivated because of fears of blockchain technology or concerns of money being lost. It's really just it gives people suddenly an opportunity to bring capital outside the country, and that's what worries China. So entirely politically motivated attempts to go after blockchain regulations. We have seen certain steps in that direction also in the US, without being that blunt as in China. But still, there are concerns as well, and especially considering that the US dollar is still the predominant currency used in commodity trading markets and the like. If suddenly that currency will be replaced by probably a cryptocurrency, that's a significant blow to their economy.
That's true. The Swiss Parliament has just adopted new regulations that are expected to be put in force as of the beginning of 2021. The European Commission has just published a proposal for a crypto framework. What will the future hold in terms of regulations?
Yeah, indeed. The Swiss government has performed a market survey and has asked if and to what extent, due to the entire digitalization, Swiss law needs to be updated at some point. And they have come up with a proposal to amend certain laws with regard to distributed ledger technology, of which blockchain is one applicable thing. They have decided not to implement separate regulation in a bigger scope, but rather amend the law in individual instances. For example, the new regulation would actually allow the tokenization of shares in the company, and then also validly transfer those shares via a token transfer over the blockchain. They have also proposed some amendments to bankruptcy laws to make it clear to whom certain tokens belong, depending on custody. They will also introduce a new form of exchange based on distributed ledger technology, not requiring the same or not being required to meet the same requirements as traditional exchanges, but rather because they are decentralized and everything is transparent, getting such a permit easier. But other than that, it's not expected that Switzerland will amend its laws, be it financial market infrastructure or be it anti-money laundering, in a very significant way, at least not with that piece of legislation. On the EU level, we indeed have seen that there is now a proposal for a new legislation on crypto assets, which is quite a big piece, to be honest. It requires a little bit of time to read through. But I think it's two things. First of all, it's potentially applicable to everyone doing business and offering tokens within the European Union. So regardless of where your corporate domicile is or where you're sitting in the world, if you offer these tokens in the European Union within that territory or offer these kind of services, then you're subject to these potentially subject to these regulations. And the second aspect that is really interesting is essentially the fact that there are certain exclusions to which the proposed regulation would not apply. After having gone through those exclusions, it seems pretty clear that whatever is similar to traditional financial instruments or traditional financial market service offerings is still subject to the existing regulations such as MiFID II and the Prospectus Directive and etc. So again, we have the question here, what share in the market do they really regulate with that piece? It could actually well be that now everybody is jumping on it and looking if and to what extent it would regulate crypto assets, and then really coming to the conclusion that it doesn't even apply to them, simply because they are already a financial instrument under another regulation. So it's really interesting to see how this evolves. My guess is that we're still seeing another piece of legislation that is regulating a rather small fraction of the actual market. But I really look forward to what is coming, because in a broader general, what we have seen so far is predominantly national regulation or maybe quasi-national, if you look at the European Union. But my question is really, is that sufficient? In the decentralized world, essentially, we're talking about decentralized and potentially global business models per definition. I've not yet seen a business model being blockchain-based and saying we want to stay in Switzerland only. Everything is cross-border, everything is global, essentially. So do we really get along with national or some sort of multinational regulation, or don't we need something like a global regulation? Now you can certainly object we will never see that as long as certain countries have veto rights in the United Nations, and there is still a race to the bottom that everybody wants to attract these kind of business models with having loose regulations. But so it's although we would actually need some sort of global regulation, I think it's a really tough one to actually get there.
Do you see a really good chance that we have a global regulation, really?
No.
Okay, that's short, direct. Yeah, I think it's not easy because we can see that now in this crisis, I think, which we have their solution when all these specialists sitting together and make a plan, how can we find a solution in the whole world. It would be helpful for every one of us, but I don't see the solution. And we find this in blockchain, we find this in this crisis, and it's not easy to bring all the guys on the right table to.
Fully agree.
Yeah, it is really tough. Ich werde noch ein paar Fragen in Deutsch stellen, du darfst gerne in Englisch antworten, dann kriege ich die Fragen besser zustande, aber bleib ruhig im Englischen. Ich weiß, wir haben ja beides hier involviert, in Deutsch und in Englisch. Wie kommt es da ausgerechnet dazu, jetzt als Anwalt, dich speziell auf gerade auf so ein Geschehen, was noch nicht reguliert ist, wo es sehr komplex zugeht, wo Wild-West-Situationen herrschen, dich darauf zu spezialisieren? Ist das nicht ein harter Job?
Also nur weil es hart ist, heißt es nicht, dass man es nicht machen soll. Nee, es ist wirklich Interesse. Ich arbeite schon seit 10 Jahren im Startup-Bereich, bin immer wieder auf innovative Businessmodelle gestoßen. I have worked for 10 years in the startup sector and always came across interesting business models. So working with these kind of people has always been very interesting. And now it is really the challenge also from a legal perspective. I mean, as I said, nobody wanted to hear back in 2017 that there is financial market regulation and could potentially apply. And one of the questions I heard the most back then was essentially, can't we do it without regulation? And I strictly said no, because there are potentially criminal sanctions associated with breaking these laws. So I wouldn't go there. So I still like that environment. The law is not per definition against innovation, but if you want to go into the financial market sector, regardless of what technology you use, you're subject to regulations. So that unfortunately needs to be clear for everyone.
Okay. Ja, vielleicht noch eine andere Frage. Wir haben jetzt vorhin gerade gehört von Beat Bachmann, der sagt, es macht sehr viel Sinn, dass man sich hier niederlässt, gerade mit Blockchain-Projekten oder alles, was mit Kryptowährungen und so weiter zu tun hat. Denkst du, dass die Regulierungen, die 2021 kommen, hier die Kooperationsbereitschaft zwischen Startups und auch den hiesigen Banken, dass die sich öffnen, dass sie sagen, jawohl, wir arbeiten hier gerne mit euch zusammen, dass diese Regulationen dann helfen werden, es leichter zu machen, hier was zu tun in der Richtung, was Konteneröffnung angeht und so weiter?
Not really, because the changes that we are seeing now or are expecting to become law in 2021 really focus on tokenizing shares, essentially, which is already a quite significant step, but is not necessarily legalizing everything else. And also, one thing that needs to be considered you cannot wash away or necessarily clean up what has happened in the past. And these concerns are still with the banks. As far as the big blockchains such as Bitcoin, Ripple, Ether are concerned, none of them have actually done KYC checks with participants. None of them have actually reviewed transactions. It's all out there. And I'm definitely not saying that these are all criminals, not at all. I mean, but you cannot avoid them, especially if you offer that some sort of anonymity. You cannot avoid that there are criminals, and banks are still and will remain afraid of accepting money coming from blockchains that do not have built-in KYC checks.
Okay, ja, thank you.
At least for now.
Ja, thank you for that. Michael, vielen Dank. Vielen Dank für deine Antworten und für deine Zeit, die du jetzt hier gerade mit eingebracht hast. Ich habe mich sehr gefreut, dass du da bist. Wenn alles meiner Informationen entspricht, dann bist du heute Abend auch im Panel. Und dann da freue ich mich auch drauf. Und ich werde dir dann heute Abend persönlich dieses wunderbare Buch von eurem Spezialisten hier aus der Schweiz geben, Dr. Daniele Ganser, Friedensforscher und Historiker. Da sind ganz viele Dinge drinnen. Folge dem Geld und du findest die Antworten. Da sind viele Informationen sehr drinnen. Ich hoffe, wir sehen uns dann heute Abend. Dankeschön für deine...
Vielen Dank.
Bis später. Dankeschön. Ciao.